All right, Brett. You've been in the Python community like forever. I just checked and you co-authored PEP number two, right? So that's probably 2001 or three, four. I don't remember, but that's a very, very long time ago. Uh,
So, to be clear, a lot of the older peps I became co-authors of because I helped take over their maintenance, not because I was one of the original authors.
okay, that makes sense.
So PEP 2, PEP 11, a lot of those really early ones are just someone originally was the owner of them, and then I've just, as you said, been around long enough that eventually I was the one who brought up, oh, we should do this, we should do that. And then eventually it just goes like, oh, well, why don't you just be co-author of it now, Brent? And I'm like, okay, fine. So it could be a little misleading on those
Yeah, it
early
would
peps
be.
if I happen to be a
Maybe,
co-author.
but you were already here in at the time of the mailing list, like Python IDs and Python dev. I remember seeing your name in there, and that
Yeah, so I joined the Python dev mailing list in June of 2002,
yeah.
became a core dev in April of 2003, April 18th specifically, and I actually started the Python ideas mailing list along with Titus Brown.
For the record, I was coding in PHP at the time, so it's a very long time ago in PHP 3.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, that's a blast from the past. Okay, and
Hmm.
nowadays, well, you're part of the team of core dev. You're also taking care of some part of packaging. You're working on
Hmm.
Microsoft, right? Is there anything
Correct.
else that you would like to say about yourself so that we can introduce to people that would not know you?
You obviously heard I've been a core dev for a very long time. I was on the inaugural steering council when it started, and I served on that for 5 consecutive years until I stepped down, mainly because I thought 5 years was long enough for anyone to be on the council. Yeah, as you mentioned, I've also been heavily involved in packaging. Way back when I was kind of known as the person who implemented import lib and rewrote Python's import system in pure Python. Um, yeah, it's hard. It's always hard to do this list without overdoing the humble brag. Plus, I've been
Yeah,
doing it for so
exactly.
long, I forget parts that were started way back when. Like no one
But
remembers when dummy thread and dummy threading was added and when I wrote that, but that goes with my
it's
first
part
larger
of the goal of the
contributions back
podcast
then.
also to show some light on people because you all the people that comes here they've been spending so much time working on open source and basically for free, right? So I
Yeah.
think that if you can brag a little bit, I mean you can that's you earned it at this point, I think, for the entire
Mm.
community. That's actually a perfect segue to the council because I think not a lot of people in the community know actually what it does and why we chose this way of doing things now. So could you
Hmm.
introduce us a little bit about how it works? Because we never talked about this in the podcast.
Yeah. So after Guido stepped down as being BDFL, he left it up to the core dev team to choose how we wanted to basically govern ourselves and run ourselves. And we had a whole process choosing how we wanted to vote on what process we wanted to use in the end in terms of organizing ourselves. And then we had several PEPs all written up by various people about various governance models. And the one that ended up winning out is our current one, the steering council model. It's made up of 5 people. We hold elections every November. The whole council goes up at once, so it's not staggered like some councils. And effectively, the steering council technically runs the project in a way, but it's fairly hands off, right? Like we very much expect everything to be driven by consensus. The steering council typically handles things where no one else is really necessarily in a position to do it. So that's like deciding on PEPs, right? Like the steering council will be the ones that either accept or reject PEPs, unless they delegate to a PEP delegate, in which case that's up to the PEP delegate. The steering council's handled code of conduct issues, partially because there's no one really above the steering council, so it just kind of falls on their shoulders to have to deal with that mucky, yucky part. And then it's just any other decisions that kind of um, play into how the project runs. But honestly, the steering council really tries to not really dictate how things happen. The steering council has always really tried to let the core team decide as a group how things should go. It's also why there's a lot of discussion around PEPs, and very rarely does if ever, honestly, I'm just hedging my bets because I can't remember a specific instance where the steering council really went against what the core team wanted, right? Like there's some hemming and hawing, maybe a split, like 50-50, and so the steering council had to break the split, but I don't remember when it's like 90% of the core dev team said, no, don't accept this PEP, and the steering council did anyway. Um, And that's it. I mean, it's a lot of discussions. We set guidance for the developers and residents as well. So help guide them once I'm kind of trying to keep the project running. The way I used to phrase it was if the whole core dev team quit one day, it's up to the steering council to keep the project running and keep it going. But that's basically it. It's really just the people have to make the final decisions when someone has to make that kind of decision. That's basically it.
We're quite far from the BDFL model, right? It's less centralized. There are much more trust put in people that are specialized in some part of Python.
I mean, to be fair, before Guido stepped down, he was already starting to delegate,
Yeah.
right? So the whole concept of PEP delegates was started by Guido. So before he decided he didn't want to be the top of the responsibility pyramid, Guido had already started to say, oh, I don't have the area expertise to make this call. I'm going to appoint blank to make the call for the PEP. So that's actually not a unique steering council decision, but you are right that it is a step away from the BDFL model where single person has all the weight on their shoulders versus the steering council of 5 people where we get to spread the load. And I will be honest, helps because I think one of the problems with when Guido was BDFL was everyone directly blamed him for anything they didn't like. Versus when the steering council makes a decision no one likes, there's no one person you can blame, right? Because you don't know how the vote went. So you don't know who did or didn't vote the way you wanted to. So because it's kind of a nebulous group of people tend to get way less mad at the steering council than they ever did at Guido. Like the reason Guido stepped down is because people got so mad over assignment expressions and directly got mad at him. Versus the steering council, I think we've done that's been anyway tumultuous. Unless someone on the steering council specifically speaks up publicly to say, I said this or I voted this way, you just don't know. This is one of the reasons we also don't release the votes so that no one can get personally attacked. And it definitely helps with that.
It's fascinating to think that something like the walrus was so controversial at the time because it's such a teeny thing. And yet.
So I've been doing this long enough to know that pretty much any syntactic change to the language is always tumultuous. Like it's very rarely smooth. People are very protective of this language and they are very worried all the time that something's going to come in and either change the language in a very fundamental way that makes it not fun for them, or it will be the start of a snowball effect of leading to other changes that will lead to the language not being fun for them and a pleasure to work with, and somehow lead to the language not being as popular, right? Yeah. Some people, it's I use this and I enjoy it and I don't want to stop enjoying it. For some people, it's their livelihood, right? And if suddenly the popularity of the language tanks, their livelihood suddenly gets challenging, right? Because they'll have to pivot and do something else. So understandably, some people take it very personally when the language looks like it's going to shift. And with the assignment expressions, but as I said, any piece of syntax, people always think it's going to be the sort of, oh my God, the language is going to balloon to this huge thing. And suddenly it won't, that phrase, Python fits your brain, will no longer be true. And this will be the thing that finally makes it not good for scripting or not good for app development or et cetera, right? The constant push and pull of make it easy to learn, but usable in enterprise situations and being great for one-off scripts, but also great for developing entire multi-billion-dollar companies around, right? It's a constant struggle, and everyone's always worried that somehow we're going to pull it one way or the other and not maintain the balance that we've managed to keep. And so it just happens every time. Walrus is not new. It just finally pushed things over the edge. Plus, I mean, this was top level amount of social media in the world, right? This is back when Twitter was Twitter, and a whole bunch of stuff. And so it was a lot of everyone felt like they could express an opinion and express an opinion in a way that it all got to Guido versus I'm going to go yell at my blog over here and Guido will never see it. And so it was one of these things of just, I mean, he's just like, nah, I've done this enough. I've gone through this cycle enough times. I'm done. And to be honest, I honestly thought he was within a couple of years of retiring anyway. It just was sooner than I expected. Like I'd always assumed it would be like another like 3 years from when he did it. So I think it just accelerated it. But he's always said he was planning to retire at some point. Hence the PEP delegates was kind of another step towards that, and just he'd been working his way. So it was coming. We just didn't all expect it to happen when it happened. So,
There has been a kind of a shift in the open source community during the last 20 years. Because at the beginning on the internet, there was more of a, it was more niche really to be part of open source communities. And now there are way more people, obviously. And so there's a different approach and there are different type of people. And the sheer mass of things as well is different. Like
yeah.
if you have one critic, it can hurt. But if you have 1,000 of them because of the sheer mass of it, even if you have 1 million fans, it can hit bad, right? And I can see,
Yeah.
I've seen during the last 5 years a lot of maintainer taking that quite personally and feeling the heat really about these critics.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of the reasons where I've disagreed with some people over code of conduct and how to handle it, right? It's one of the reasons I'm really a strong proponent for codes of conduct and enforcement of them, because the old "don't feed the trolls, they'll eventually go away" doesn't necessarily help to me standardize and dictate um, expected behavior. And the problem is if someone's determined and you just ignore them, doesn't mean they're going to go away. They'll still be there and they'll still be taking up time and air in the room. But the scale is also just completely different. As you said, like back in the day, languages like, I mean, when I got involved in Python, right? Python was this language that kind of people knew about. They maybe knew of its existence, and if they did, they would always like when people used to like when I went to my master's program. It was I started that shortly after I became a core dev, and people would ask like, "What do you do in your spare time?" It's like, "Oh, you know what? I work on the Python programming language." Half the people would say, "What's that?" And the other half would say, "Oh, is that language where white space matters?" Right? Like no concept. Like everyone who used language used it because they loved it. Right? It was totally a passion thing. And then Jacob Kaplan-Moss of Django fame pointed out one year at PyCon, say like, "Oh my God, hey, you won't believe it. I finally met someone who didn't want to be at PyCon." Right? And that was a turning point because up to that point, everyone who went to PyCon because they wanted to go to PyCon because they loved the language. They brought it in through the back door, right? Like they somehow snuck it into their company or something. And then when we finally got big enough that people were being forced to go to PyCon and they didn't like using Python, it kind of was a turning point of popularity scale. And the last number I was told was an estimate of there's about 20 million Python developers in the world. So let's do some quick math. Okay. 10% of 20 million is 2 million. 1% is 200,000. Let's take it one more magnitude down. Let's do 0.1%. Okay. That's 20,000 people. If you assume the amount of jerks in the world are only 0.1%, that is still 5 digits worth of people in the world who can find you on the internet and yell at you about what you do. Right? And this is something I think a lot of people don't understand about the scale of this project and a lot of other large scale open source projects. That when you hit a certain number, the absolute numbers of people you have to deal with who don't like you is so large that it's effectively impossible to avoid them. Right? Like when your project's small and someone doesn't like it, it's one person, it's easy to block or ignore or whatever. But when we're talking tens of thousands of people and you're on the internet and easily accessible, like a lot of us are, you can't escape it. It's always going to be there. And especially if you're willing to put yourself out there and broadcast your opinions or try to help people or anything at all, it makes you very easy to reach. And it's exhausting to be fair. I mean, it's not scientifically proven, right? But the old adage of it takes 10 nice things to counteract one negative thing
Mm,
is kind of true. Like I will tell you, when I get a really negative, nasty comment, it's exhausting. And it takes a lot for people to say something nice to kind of overdo it, to undo that. And not only that, most people don't say nice things, not because they don't think it or mean it, they just don't think to say it,
mm,
right? Like if you think of an issue tracker, you don't go to an issue tracker to say, good job, I love what you're doing, keep it up. You go to an issue tracker to say, there's a problem that's making my day hard.
yeah.
So it can be rather exhausting.
Mm.
So anytime an open source maintainer says, hey, could I get some nice comments, please? They're not doing it to be selfish or to boost their ego. They're doing it probably because they got a really nasty comment for someone and just need to feel good about what they're putting their time and effort into. And that is definitely the bigger shift, I think, that we've all had to learn to deal with is just exposure. It's just the exposure we all have. And just having 20 million users is amazing and great and still blows my mind when I think about that number.
It's crazy.
But also thinks about there are at least probably 20,000 people on the planet who absolutely hate the design decisions I've helped make and would love to tell me that fact. And so it's just one of those things you just got to kind of learn to deal with. And once again, hopefully you have a really good code of conduct to back you up when someone comes in. You say, no, you need to go away. Sorry, you just aren't allowed to participate. You're not making this a uh, friendly, welcoming, open environment for people to basically exist in. So yeah.
And the code of conduct have been quite a debate as well. And I must say, at the beginning, I was personally quite not sure if it would be a good thing. I felt like it would remove the humanity, in the way we all interact, the natural aspect of all the interactions, and make it a bit
Mhm.
corporatey, make it a bit. And I was afraid that it would be also apply too strictly and that we
Mhm.
would not discuss and make joke anymore. And it's kind of true in a way, in the sense that there are indeed less joke in discuss.python.org than there used to be in Python ID. But there is also so much less negativity. Like Python ID used to be a cesspool of fighting all the time. It was really, really,
Yep.
really an arena. And you had to hold your yeah, it was more about if you could hold on to the argument itself than just arguing your point. And discuss.python.org is actually very civil. It's people are really nice. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it worked eventually.
Yeah, I mean, that was why Python Ideas, why it was one of the first mailing lists to bring in a code of conduct. Right? Titus and I very much recognized that because people got so passionate about the language, and Python Ideas was where people came to bring out interesting ideas, often for the first time in such a large forum, that it led to a lot of negative interactions. Because let's be honest, if you don't live in this space constantly, which most people don't, I mean, it's a very different experience, right? When I used to be a manager, I used to tell my reports like, hey, when you deal with someone on the issue tracker, assume like this is the first time they're interacting with anyone outside of their workspace or their family or their friend circle, and that they live in a small town somewhere in a culture that's not yours, right? Which is totally reasonable to assume, right? Like not everyone has moved all around the world for jobs or school or whatever, or really work at a multinational company or any of this. Typical person grows up in the town that they were born in, maybe moves somewhere nearby, but wants to stay near family, right? That same group of friends, whatever. And it's you just don't get exposed to this sort of thing. And so having someone come in and say, like, hey, just so you know, the way you're phrasing that culture for you might be okay, isn't culturally okay to me, and not being insulted by that and going like, oh wow, I had no idea, versus like, well, what do you mean you can't tell me how I should talk and how I should be and how I should act, blah, blah. It's a balancing act, right? And it's one where you want to always try to educate, but unfortunately not everyone listens to when you try to help explain this to them and say like, look, we're trying to find a baseline here where everyone can interact happily and contently and safely and feel they can come here, be themselves, all without being worried whether or not they're going to be insulted today versus, as you said, going way overboard with the code and being very militant and very like, no, you have to act this way. This is what you have to do. You can never say a joke ever again because it could insult one person on the planet. All the way to you can be whoever you want, and if it makes someone cry and literally want to walk away from the internet forever, that's okay.
Mm.
Right? It's a balancing act, and it's hard, and it's people, right? People are messy. It's not easy. We don't have a court system here. All we have are people who volunteer to help enforce codes of conduct, and at least in all the codes of conduct enforcement groups I've ever been involved with, all very much understand that this is a balancing act, and that it is something you have to be very careful about to make sure people feel like they can express themselves, but not in such a way that it's going to be harmful to others.
Mm.
And it's just hard. It's just flat out hard. And once again, it's one of these things where people only come to you when they have problems, never to come to you and say, good job. I love this community. This is the way it should work. And I feel so welcome and so welcome here. I'm so glad you're all doing the code of conduct and you're enforcing it versus, hey, I'm here because someone was so mean to me, or screw you. Codes of conduct suck. Don't make me change how I want to talk. And so another one of
Yeah.
those areas of it's very easy to get a lot of negative and not much positive out of it.
Should write an article, say thank you to a maintainer next week or something like that, because we need to
Yeah.
do that. We really need to spread the love on this topic,
Yep.
and not in a in a forced way to just virtue signals, but really show gratitude. We so many people build their entire career, sometimes life, around free software. So that's quite a lot of life that we are changing right now. But I know also that there are some aspect of unexpected aspect of the code of conduct. For example, we had one core dev members, I think last year, that has been in trouble because of violation to the code of conduct. Can you tell us more about that?
I probably shouldn't
Okay.
because unfortunately, due to my level of involvement with codes of conduct, I'm involved both as a moderator on discuss.python.org and I'm a member of the PSF conduct working group.
Mm.
And if it's the thing you're talking about, it got very messy.
It did.
And unfortunately, I know all the sides, and I don't want to misstep or misspeak about things that were not meant to be shared publicly or not. So it's probably easier that I don't get into it.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair. It's not, as you said, it's very difficult. People are from various places in the world, especially in the Python community. It's very diverse, right? You're Canadian, Guido, we're from Europe, I'm French. The USA are only 5% of the world population, right? But also there are differences in age and in different type of corporation and things like that. So it changes a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm Canadian, right? So, like, I also know people make complete mistakes about English speaking North Americans all being the same and not
Mm.
understanding that, oh, there's a very much a difference between Canada and the US and all that. And just even stuff like that, where it's very easy to forget. Yeah, just things operate differently and people have different expectations. And yeah, how do you manage that? And how do you try to find that commonality where everyone's agrees that, okay, this is the commonality that makes sense and one that we all agree to and are happy with. And, it's hard. I mean, this is community building. And people are just people are hard.
People are hard, but yeah, you've been doing a great job. I mean, Guido have been doing Guido have been doing a great job. But the new steering council and well, the new steering council, actually the different versions of steering council that we had, and
Hmm.
the people around have been doing a fantastic job as well, because
Yeah.
the language is still very dynamic. The development is still very dynamic. We had new features, we have new deprecation, of course, but also the
Hmm.
interpreter has been changing a lot. The language keeps growing, so I think it's a
Yeah.
big success, and it was not something that we should have taken for granted. So it's quite amazing.
Yeah. No, and I think another kudo. I mean, it feels weird to say kudos to the steering council because I mean, obviously I was a part of it, but I think another thing is also a consistent understanding both from the core team and the steering council as well of the changing importance of Python, right? Like earlier on in the language, it was way easier to make changes because guess what? The amount of people who are going to get impacted by this when they do an update are all going to be people who love Python, choose to make the changes, and can keep up no problem, right? Like if you snuck the language in through the back door into your company and you're using it for yourself, you kind of knew going into that you're going to have to be the one that keeps it running. But you loved it enough that it was okay. Compare that to now where we have multi-billion dollar companies depending on what we do. We have people's schoolwork depending on us now, right? Like the level of responsibility has grown tremendously, right? And I think it was one of the lessons learned in the Python 2 to 3 transition was we had hit this popularity point that we hadn't quite grasped at the time that oh, we've got so many people now that we now have a swath of user base that some will totally go along with whatever we do, and some will only do it kicking and screaming. And understanding that flip had happened. And we've continued to learn that lesson and continue to evaluate where we are to the point that like changing the language now is way harder than it used to be. And on purpose and for good reason, right? Once again, the reach is so huge that we only want to make changes that are truly impactful and truly useful and really there, which we did, which I mean, we did before, but we also don't have to weigh it with what is the upgrade cost, right? Before it was just, oh, well, if you have to upgrade some code, fine, whatever. But if it's like, oh no, if you don't make a change to your code in 5 years, you will break. Like, okay, is this worth it? Is this worth making someone have to put in the time and effort to change their code to work with this new feature? Or if it's a purely add-on feature, it's like, okay, no one's going to break, but at least is this going to be easy enough to find on a search engine now? Is it going to be easy enough for a kid to understand if they see it for the first time, et cetera, et cetera? So it just shifts responsibility, and it's led to a natural and I think reasonable slowdown of the language's change rate, right? And for good reasons, right? As I said, so yeah, we've definitely perpetually looked into just trying to be there. And as I said, I think the steering council's done a good job of keeping an eye on that fact of trying to make sure the weighing the pros and cons, and the cons always being what's the upgrade cost and what does that look like, as well as how well will it service the very wide breadth of user base that we now have. Just trying to keep that all in mind whenever making a decision.
And no matter what you do, if you don't change the language enough, somebody's going to tell you that Python is a no language, that it's not, modern enough. And then if you change it too much, they will say, okay, you're breaking compatibility again. I cannot have a stable system. I think 10 years after the 2 to 3 transition, I worked with a client. He was in the Silicon Valley, and still they had a product that was using Python 2.5. So there is a huge inertia to change that people don't realize, because most people are working in their little bubble of Python and then don't realize that you've got researchers and biologists and geographers and people in startups and people in big corporate environment and teachers and a whole swath of different type of people. But you say okay. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're now in K through 12 education programs around the world, right? Like, I'm not kidding when you have to make sure a kid could potentially understand this. Like, that's not an exaggeration anymore. To the point of like people who literally will not upgrade until they have to. Like, I've had people come to me when I was the manager for the Python extension of VS Code, and we dropped old Python version support in the debugger. And I had some people come to me fairly upset, like, "Hey, I can't have you do this. I use Python from a third-party supplier on an IoT device, so it's literally baked in, and I can't change the version. And now that you've done this, I can't debug that code anymore." I mean, this is when I said, well, you can always pin to the old version. You don't have to upgrade to the new version, blah, blah, blah. But like, yeah, it's very much a different scenario of Python's early beginnings of, oh, it's just a replacement for bash scripts, right? Now it's like, no, this is now getting baked into silicon. Like it's very far from when Guido first released Python 0.9 on the internet way
And
back
now
when.
you've got MicroPython and WASM. So you will have even more platforms with even more variation. It's going to be a ton of fun. And you said
Oh
that.
yeah, hell, we're on Mars now, so I mean, it's
So you said that Python is not moving as much as before, as fast at least as before, the changes, I mean. But
mhm,
some people will say that actually Python is getting quite big uh, because we have the type now. We have, of course, the whole Asankai of things with an entire different paradigm on how we work.
mhm.
And of course, we have different operators, and the annotation has been used to for a lot of different purpose than just typing. Pythontic being very, very popular right now. So
Mhm.
Python is getting quite big, and there is, as you said, this fear that Python is getting too big to fit my brain, as you used to, as you said, or maybe to learn Python easily. I tend to answer to that everything is optional and that Python, you can still write Python as you wrote it 10 years ago. It still works. But what would be your point of view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing to understand is how much Python do you need to know to be productive,
Mm,
right? So, sure, typing adds a whole nother level of stuff, especially if you're doing very complicated typing. Let's be honest, if you do very simple typing, it doesn't add that much overhead. The problem is a lot of us know how dynamic the language is. We take advantage of those features, and then typing gets hard.
mm,
If we all stuck with just simple straight classes and the built-in types, it's not so crazy.
yeah.
So I will say that's a little self-inflicted. Um, not to throw shade for anyone doing that. It's just I would like to think that if we just put on more guard, or if people chose to focus on typing first, had we and then we not brought it in, that's just how we designed things. It would have made typing a bit easier because, like, yeah, that's gonna make typing that really hard and messy, and it's gonna make the type checkers work extra hard. Like, I'm gonna keep this API simple. And then, yeah, async is a whole other thing as well. But for instance, if I need to write a script that renames all of files in a directory in a certain way, the language is really small. It doesn't take a lot, right? And you can scale up pretty quick and be very productive without async, which as a concept isn't complicated because of Python. It's complicated just because it's async and understanding concurrency. And same thing with typing, right? Typing is completely optional, and you don't even have to know to use it if you don't want to. I still write code to this day that I refuse to type because it's just not worth it. It's just me. I don't need the typing. Like, some people love to type because they like the extra editor help, and that's great. And I do that sometimes too. Sometimes if the code gets a little messy and it's easier to keep straight to add the types, I add the types. But I don't do it religiously like some people. But like some people, I don't religiously leave out types either. It's just totally up to what you need. But for me, the key thing is it's all gradual. And hopefully also not only that, but if you see anything in the language for the first time outside of documentation, but in the wild in someone's code, it's hopefully self-explanatory enough that you can grasp the concept on the first look, right? Like, that's another thing we've really strived hard for is, like, if you've never seen type annotations and you see it, does it make sense as to what it's doing? Same thing with async. Does it make sense from the names and the structures of everything? Context managers. Like, if you've never seen a with statement, does it make kind of sense what's going on there? If you've never seen it before, or is it going to be really, what the heck is that doing? And so to me, that's what fitting your brain means, is not only that are the core concepts simple enough that you can keep them in your head, but also that you can be productive with the smallest amount of language and get your work done without having to know every single nuance and corner, right? Like, meta classes. Who knows meta classes? Like, no one should know meta classes. Like, it's such a niche thing. And it's really more of just an exposure of the underlying mechanism of how classes work. The meta classes really exist. And for those really, 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 really unique cases where meta classes actually make your API better and easier to use. But the vast majority of people have no freaking clue that meta classes exist, let alone how to work with them. And I don't see people worrying about that expanding the language too much, even though those semantics are really complicated. Because once again, you typically get to ignore most of the time. And I think typing's probably similar, and I think async similar, and a lot of stuff is very much along those lines of it's there if you need it, but it's somewhat niche. And for the day-to-day stuff for the vast majority of people, I still think the language is small enough that it fits in their brain and it's not a problem.
And Python always had this reputation of being executable pseudocode. But the reality
Hmm.
is, even 20 years ago, it was quite big. As you said, there are meta classes, but even context manager and generators are not that an easy context to grasp the first time you see them. Every time I try to teach them, it takes a little bit of time. And you have to
Yeah.
do a segue through comprehension lists without themselves something that you have to teach as well. The import system is not simple, and all the hooks that you can have and the interaction with the operating system, it's not simple either. The all coding things, the way the encoding works, and the way the file encoding works, that you can actually hijack it and completely transform the way the code works. You can do a lot of weird things with Python. You could already
Yes.
do a lot of weird things with Python 20 years ago, but most people just did if, else, and for loops. And you can still do
Yeah.
that today.
I think the other thing is as software developers, we have a very nasty habit of always wanting things to work because we realize how malleable the systems can be. We have a nasty habit of always wanting things to work the way we want it to work and then not wanting anything else to get in the way. So it's very easy to have conversations with people where they go like, "Oh, Python's gotten too big because of this, this, and this," which are things they never use. And then you go, "Well, what about this thing?" Like, "Oh, I need that. Like, I just used that yesterday for something. It really made a difference in my life." Right? That's the other thing is there's a balancing act about understanding and making decisions as well for the language of how impactful will this be to the person who it will make a vast difference in how they function and work and code day to day, and then how much it'll actually impact people who don't use it, right? And just where's that balance? And people, and I don't think a lot of people understand that, right? It's like with packaging, like everyone goes like, "Oh no, no, no. I want that one packaging tool to do that one thing." And they go, "Okay, we're going to choose this." And I was like, "Oh no, 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 I don't like that tool. I like this other tool." It's like, well, that's sorry, that's not part of the bargain here. You said you wanted one tool. We never said it was going to be the tool you wanted. And the same thing comes with the language, right? Like people go like, all these features, all these things I don't want. It's like, yeah, you might not want it, but you know that person sitting next to you at PyCon or whatever Python conference you're at, they really needed that yesterday, and it made a massive difference in their life for that project that they were working on. While the thing you couldn't live without, they could care less about. And so it's a really interesting thing of trying to teach people of just like, you have to understand not everything was made for you. And because of that, you have to think that potentially there's someone else out there who really needed it. And that was why that exists. And just, yeah, the balance is hard. Once again, because the user base is so broad and so diverse that you cannot make everyone happy all the time. It just is not possible. So,
You're very right that it's mostly self-infected for a lot of things, not just in Python, in so many systems actually. Because we've got
yeah.
features, we want a pony, right? And we when we see like a whole flow of pony and dragons and unicorns, we want to use everything, and we do, and we don't need everything. And when you do that, well, of course, it can lead to problems. And I think one of the best decisions the modern formatters have been doing is to not give the choice to people. FM Go FMT, for example, and then black,
Hmm.
and then rough. It's a I Most people don't like it, but they don't like it all equally, and so everybody eventually work, and that's how it works. Even it's very productive. And UV, I think,
Yeah.
is doing a good thing as well because it's not trying to be everything, but it's doing one thing right, and therefore, well, it works, and it works well. Talking about packaging.
Try to
uh,
make sure you get good segues today, Kevin.
yeah, because you've been working both as a core dev, but also on the packaging side, right? And maybe
Hmm.
something that people don't get is why those are two those two things are not the same, and why pip and venv are not part of the Python project itself, and how it
Hmm.
works, how are the entities separated, who does what and why, basically.
Yeah, I mean, basically they're separate because Guido doesn't care about packaging. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, was when packaging started to become a thing, Guido just didn't have any interest in it. And so it never became a core dev concern. right? It just never came up. It was just not our thing. And so the community in various ways stepped up to fill that void. And so it became an area of expertise that the core devs just didn't have. Like people didn't become core devs because of their packaging knowledge. People became core devs because of them working on stuff in the standard library or the interpreter or whatever. So having packaging knowledge just doesn't win you points for being a core dev, really, because it just doesn't play into it because of this separation. And once again, because Creator just wasn't interested. And so the community came up with their own solutions, whether that was easy install and setup tools and whatever. I mean, and we tried, let's be honest, with distutils, and it was okay, but it wasn't ever great. And it was hard. And once again, because the core devs didn't really make that a priority of something that they felt they should own, it never really grew. Plus, once again, changing anything in the standard library is hard because everyone automatically gets mad because it gets so widely used. Hence why distutils got removed. So it was just one of these things. It just never became a thing, and so just separate groups ended up and kind of taking ownership of it, right? Like Ian Bicking came up with pip and all that, and it just got widely used enough that it was the thing everyone used, and then people were using distutils, but setup tools got pretty popular and became kind of the de facto thing that people use. But that also got so big that people were too afraid of changing it because it would break so much stuff, and so it was just a whole thing, and it just developed in its own little group. And then there's Conda over doing its thing as well in the scientific community, and so it just never became a core thing. So it's always been run as kind of an independent group of people who have some overlap. Like, don't get me wrong, like there's a bunch of core devs who are in both camps to varying degrees. So it's not like there's no communication. It's just packaging is not run by the core development team. It's run by a separate group of people. Whether you're talking about the PyPI side or Conda doing its own thing and all that, and it's just always been just separate groups. It just organically ended up that way.
And now
Because
we
we've been
are,
doing packaging for so long,
yeah.
because that all started in, oh man, 2004 or five, around there. So yeah, this is well into 20 years now. It's been a thing this way. Versus the Volta Parnassus, where I used to get my stuff originally, which was just a bunch of hosted zip files on a website with animated GIFs of wall sconces with
Yeah.
candles. So like very different from the way I started in the community.
It was listed on Python X, which was a portal where we had everything Python for a while. It was Python Central, and we could find everything. I don't wonder if it's
Mm-hmm.
still up, actually.
I don't know.
Anyway, right now, I think there are some discussion about having some interest in paying some interest to Python packaging from the PyDev point of view, and doing something that is um, closer to home. Am I mistaken on this one?
I wouldn't say that it's not being driven by the core development side of things. It's just people involved in packaging have realized that there's been an uptick in interest in packaging as of late. And there's enough momentum now in trying to improve packaging that it makes sense to try to help scale the decision-making process beyond just one person. Because technically, the steering council, I can't remember the PEP number, through a PEP, delegate packaging PEP decisions to Paul Moore and Donald Stuff. And Donald's isn't that involved anymore. And so it's all fallen pretty much on Paul Moore's shoulders, who is a core dev, and a pip maintainer. And so this packaging council proposal, I think, is just an acknowledgement that we don't want Paul to burn out like Guido, so we're trying to get ahead of it and make it so that poor Paul doesn't have to keep shouldering all of the packaging decisions on his shoulders for all these PEPs as well. And so trying to do that, hopefully help it scale a bit more easily and all that. Help maybe set some um goals and just kind of where people want to see things go. Because much like, I mean, there's no real, there's no guidance per se towards where packaging should go. It always comes down to someone coming forward, pushing an idea, writing up a PEP, getting it accepted, and then getting the standards at packaging.python.org updated. It's not a grand vision of how things should end up. And there's just finally enough interest in the world that guess what? Some people are finally getting paid to work on packaging. And that's leading to some things accelerating finally. And that's enough to motivate people to go like, yeah, you know what, let's try to make this easier. Because if people are going to be working on this stuff paid, it means it's going to be way more stuff coming. And so let's try to help make sure Paul doesn't burn out and we can get this structured in the way we think it should be structured. So it actually has nothing to do with the core devs. It's entirely the packaging side wanting to make this happen.
Okay. And so talking about that, I saw your proposal about the locking file. How is it going?
uh, Good. For those of you who don't know, I have been working uh, on and off for, I think I calculated 6 years towards a lock file standard. Very actively for about two, I think. I think it's 2 years now, maybe three. I don't know. It all blurs together. Um, I have buy-in from all the major tools, and so like PDM, Poetry, they're actively choosing to participate. They've all been invited. Some of them are just like, oh, do whatever, and some of them are actively chatting. But PDM, Poetry, UV, um, for this is PEP 751, for at least an export target that could replace requirements.txt files when you use them as a lock file. So kind of like what pip tools, if you've ever used pip tools to lock your dependencies, basically you could replace that with this PEP. The current open question, and it's only an open question for a week because I've time boxed it to the end of February of 2025, is whether or not we try to push it a little farther out to not just be an export target, but see if we can add support for extras in dependency groups so that it can be a more universal lock file format that tools could potentially use as a lock file format. Because as the PEP stands, PDM, Poetry, and UV will export to it, but it would not be the lock file format that they personally use internally, right? So poetry.lock, pdm.lock, uv.lock, those files would still exist. There is interest, and I will say mostly from PDM via Frost Ming. Poetry has a bit of interest, and UV has said no thanks to extending the lock file format so that they can rely on it fully. Like there would be, like, for instance, if PDM adopted this, there would be no pdm.lock. It would only be this lock file format, pylock.toml specifically. But they need support for extras and dependency groups. So we're having an active conversation for the next week on that topic because I'm trying to get this all done and finished before the end of March 2025. Because as I said, I've been working on this for years and I need to stop. So yeah, so it's going well. There's at least a baseline agreement on what it can be. Now, what it will end up being is, as I said, up in the air for a week, and then we'll see.
So let's get a little bit technical on this one because we've been talking about less technical things so far.
Sure.
You've been working on that for 6 years, which means that it must be a complicated problem. Can you tell us what are the challenges about a log file? What are the different iterations it went through and how it did not work and how did you change it to improve it until we get the result that we have today?
Yeah. I will say there will eventually be a very long blog post for me, and I'm sure the next talk I give at any conference is going to be entirely about this topic and why it took so long and why Python packaging is so complicated. So if you don't get enough detail here, stay tuned. It will be in another visual or written form somehow at some point, probably in 2025. Anyway, yeah, so the complicated thing is just Python packaging is complicated. Like there are not a lot of languages out there, if any. I mean, I'm not going to say any because I'm sure there are, and I'm just not aware of them. But there are not a lot of languages out there that have to try to support Python, C, C++, Rust, Fortran. I've seen Node code in Python packages, right? Like basically can support anything, anywhere, anyhow. And so it gets really messy. And trying to make that work with the feature sets of all the other pre-existing packaging tools is also very hard, as well as trying to fit everyone's workflow. So, as an example, I wrote a PEP 665, which was my first PEP to really try to introduce this, right? Like I'd spent a long time thinking about this and talking about it, but the first PEP that I really wrote for this was 665. And the thing I did there was I did not cover source distributions or SDists. I left SDists out. It was only for wheels. And the reason I did that was simplicity, uh, and for security, right? Like I don't think a lot of people think about the fact that source distributions pull in build tools, which just add a whole nother vector of potential security problems, right? Because it's running on your machine or some other machine and whatever. And you might say, okay, well, yours is locked down. It's like, that's fine. But the chain of events and things that could go wrong are just bigger because there's just more software involved, right? Versus a wheel where you still technically probably have to trust the creator of that wheel. And that could still be you, by the way. But at least that's a separate concept and separated from the lock file. The lock file just has to concern itself with, can I get the wheel that I was locked against and install it? And once again, this gets complicated because like wheels are designed to work on different platforms, right? Like, all right, is this going to work on Mac? Is this going to work on Windows? Is this going to work on Linux? What do you install if something's got a conditional dependency on a platform versus not, and all that stuff, right? Like, if you ever look at the output of pip tools, for instance, what can it list? It can list the versions that it depends on for each package, the hashes of every single solitary file that it finds for that project, and then it'll list the dependence of that package to know why it was pulled in. But that's it. There's nothing there about like, okay, which hash file points to which thing. There's no protections against installing on a platform that you didn't lock against, because I think a lot of people don't realize pip tools lock files are not inherently cross-platform. They're actually tied specifically to the environment you locked for. So if there was any conditional anything, it gets left out and just dropped. And so if you locked on Mac and there was something Windows specific, it just disappears. And so if you try to run that on Windows, it won't work the same way. And there's just lots of little details like that. And as I said, I didn't cover SDists. And what happened was that PEP died because there were just enough people saying that my workflow at work fully depends on source distributions. And it's interesting that experience was it was a lesson in, it's like startups are small enough, they don't care, right? Their build system's small, it's nimble, they can do what they need. And then you start to get to medium-sized businesses where they've kind of built up this build system and approach to doing software deployment that they don't necessarily have the time or energy to change, but they are potentially paying a price for some early design decisions that in hindsight maybe they shouldn't have done. And then you get to the massive corporations who've completely learned the lessons on the way and realize, no, we got to completely own it top to bottom with a dedicated team. And it doesn't matter because we have our own build systems, right? Like I used to work at Google. I have lived that life. It is a very interesting way to live. But you run the gamut, right? From, yeah, do whatever works best. We'll adopt it, to, oh, we can't do this unless you cover our use case, to, we don't care. We don't use any of this. We completely build everything from scratch because we're so big, we can't trust anything. And it got rejected because there were just enough people who came out and said like, oh, no, I need Estes support, period. So I got rejected in the end. And so I had to go back to the drawing board and figure out how to make Estes work in a way that made people happy. And it was a lot of back and forth because some people were like, oh, well, how do I lock the build requirements for my S-test or do this or do that. And it's like, well, this gets really messy really, really fast because so many people don't just want to lock what they're going to install. They want to lock what they're going to use to build the things that they're going to install, right? And it just starts to cascade. And then the other thing on top of all this is, as I said, PDM, Poetry, UV as the three main tools that have been the most participatory in the conversations by choice. Once again, I'm not throwing shade at the other tools. They just were like, do whatever you need to do. We're good. Um, all have different needs, right? So there were a lot of discussions about like, okay, do we do what like PDM and Poetry do, and do we list all the potential packages and versions that you might want to install as kind of like a set, and you just go through each entry in the set and go like, do I install this? Yes or no? Or do you do what UV does and you actually record the graph? And so you can't just look at an individual entry in the log file and go like, would I install that on my machine? Well, you don't know. You've got to actually start from the entry point into the dependency graph and then walk it through the log file to figure out what you want. But that has impact and that impacts the design, right? Like if you have the set, you have to propagate all of the conditional reasons you may or may not want to include anything in every single entry. But if you do the graph, you only have to include it at the edges, and then that just propagates down as you walk the graph. And so there was just a lot of back and forth of like, oh, hey, I need this feature, or I need that feature, and et cetera, et cetera. And like, oh, hey, let's all work together and try to make a unified log file that works for every single tool. And then um, people are just constantly coming in with more and more needs. And the running joke I have with Hinnick of Adder's fame uh, is he killed the idea of unified lock files because he came in during the discussion and said, oh, hey, you're requiring version numbers. And that's messy if you're pulling from a source tree or because you might be using some automatic calculation of a version number off of the source tree, whether it's embedding the date or commit hash or whatever. And that was a turning point because it led to a discussion of, yeah, you know what, maybe we need to scale this back. Maybe we're overcorrecting here and trying too hard to make everyone happy, right? Because like I went from kind of a replacement for requirements.txt files, and that's what all this discussion years and years and years ago was, to let's try to make PDM, Poetry, and UV all happy, to maybe we need to go back to only being requirements.txt file to where we currently are is like, well, maybe I can at least make PDM happy. And Poetry has said they might go with it, but they haven't evaluated it. And UV has just said, yeah, very likely not for what they need. But that's just because UV does extra stuff like workspaces that are just not standard. So they just won't be covered by this. And so that's where we're at. It's just been a lot of discussing, a lot of back and forth. Like I did the math the other day, and the number of comments on the discussions on discusspython.org are in the thousands over years. So it's just kind of typical Python packaging. It's complicated and it's hard, and everyone has opinions and everyone has their needs for what they need it for today. And you try to figure out what makes sense to meet the needs for as many people as you can, while potentially having to tell some people, sorry, I don't want to say you're doing it wrong, but we ain't going to support you. And also, how do you make sure it's future proof? Because you know changes will obviously come in the future, and make sure that you can handle the changes, because obviously Python packaging is not static based on things that have changed from 2000 to today. And so, yeah, it's just hard. So just a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussions, and just a lot of learnings and discussions, and people having epiphanies and leading to massive changes in the format and and now I've just put a time box on it. It's like, version 1 at least will be done by the end of March.
And I remember it was something like that for PyProject.toml at the beginning as well. And it was a very small in scope file at the beginning. It was just to support additional build. If I remember well, it was about building things, just to plug things. And then after that,
Yes.
we had started to have metadata. At the beginning, I think we had actually this discussion years and years ago. I said, yeah, PyProject.toml is going to replace setup.py. And you said, no, it's not going to replace setup.py. That's not the goal. And then eventually we put everything in PyProject.toml. .toml now, and I think it's the biggest file ever. But it
Yeah, well, so the funny
is,
thing with PyProject.toml is, yeah, so the original goal with that, um, and that file was defined in PEP 518, and then the build system table was defined in PEP 517, was, yeah, originally it was meant as a way to basically, the way I've always phrased it, was to make setup tools a choice, not a requirement. Because up to that point, you couldn't do anything in Python packaging to build anything, at least on the PyPA side of things, unless it was setup tools. Like everyone just assumed setup tools. That was it. Like there was no mechanism to say, hey, if you download this thing, use this tool to build it. Everyone just always looked for that setup.py file and just executed that setup.py file, which wasn't great because you don't want to necessarily have to execute Python code live in your system just to build something. That's a security risk. And also, it's not something you can necessarily introspect either, right? Because once again, you got to run live code to find out anything. And so PyProject.toml was meant to make it so like, you know what, we can now let projects tell the tool that's doing the build from source tree or source distribution to wheel what tool to use. And that was it. That was really its key goal, was we're going to have this build system table that specifies, hey, I need this tool installed and working, and here's how you call it. And now it's fully introspectable. Like any tool can now use that to figure out how to build a wheel. And the thing is, we added this little tool table for each tool to stick their own config details in there if necessary, right? The thing is Black decided to use that and not to build the wheels for Black, but for Black's configuration. And that is not what it was meant for. But the thing is so many projects did that and configured Black using that, that suddenly PyProject.toml spread out real fast, like, and for uses we didn't initially plan for. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't have some hopes that eventually we would consolidate configurations into a single file, but that was not its intended goal at step one. But we had that, and then on top of that, it got messy because the way the standard worked was we said, like, look, if you define a PyProject.toml file and don't have a build system definition in it, we're going to default to set up tools in a wheel. And that's still the case. And I think eventually we'll probably take that out because it's been long enough now. There's like, if your project's really, really old, you can probably assume that. But if you define a PyProject.toml file, just assume that that's there. But the problem was is people started to throw this file into their projects just for the config for Black, and the default setting didn't match what their project wanted. And like that led to like build isolation for anyone who remembers that, and that whole transition for people on pip, right? Because the definition said like, oh, you have to go, if you use PyProject.toml to do the build, you have to go do it in an isolated directory so you don't screw up and pull in stuff that you actually didn't mean to get pulled in because it was just like some files you happened to leave behind when you did the build, right? We want to do it nice and clean. And so, yeah, that whole becoming the singular config file for people, except I think maybe it's Flake 8 still doesn't use it. Um, like it was a goal I had, but it was not actually an official goal for the file, at least not the start. And the community just kind of took it along and just like, no, we like this idea. Let's have less config files in our, let's stop having 5 config files in our projects. Let's just have one. Uh, and that's just kind of how it came about. Was, you know, the community kind of sped that whole thing along and it's like, no, less config files, perfect. And that's how PyProject.toml came about, at
happy
least for how it's used today.
very happy accident. Everybody wanted a package.json, but for Python. And so when
Mm-hmm.
we saw that, we just jumped on it. There was,
Yeah, and as I said, I kind of always hoped it'd end up that way, but it was definitely not a V1 goal at all. And the community just went, yeah, no, we don't care. We're not waiting for you all to decide to try to make it work somehow that way. We're just going to go for it. And so they did. So, yeah, I'm happy with the way it turned out too. Like, I remember when we were working out, like, oh, am I using Toml? I don't want to use this. I don't want to be forced to have to put my config there. Like, that's so restricting, blah, blah, blah. Like, I remember the pushback. And now no one thinks twice about it. Like, I have not heard a complaint about PyProject.toml. I've heard more sideline compliments from people like, oh my God, it was so great when the community brought in PyProject.toml and all that. Like,
Mm.
that's one of those like little side comments of like, this makes you happy. It's just like, oh man, someone's happy that I did something. It's so great to go back to our uh, saying thanks thing. Even if you don't directly thank a person, just saying thanks to whoever made this happen still makes the person who helped contribute feel good. So yeah, seeing that happen enough times is like, ah, all right, didn't screw that one up. So that feels good.
Yes, it does. It does very much. So maybe we can, because I don't have a good segue on this one. maybe, maybe we can move a little bit to Rust because well,
Sure.
actually, I could have
It's packaging
because
related.
you have the Pi launcher, right? So and it's written in
Yes.
Rust, and
Yes.
it's kind of in Python bootstrapping. I mean, there was a transition somewhere, but anyway,
Yeah.
well, let's talk about the Pi launcher actually. Where is it going to be now? Are you still going to maintain it? Do you see a future for it now that there is Pi Manager? That is going to be installed on Python, probably going to replace the Pi launcher on Python. Now that UV is taking over the world, how do you see that going on?
Yeah, so to be clear, so I am the author of the Python launcher for Unix,
Hmm.
which is the py command that you can use on like Mac and Linux and any Unix-based OS, basically not Windows. Um, Steve Dower's in charge of the Python launcher for Windows and the one that ships with the installer you get from python.org on Windows. And I I will say just because I know you, Kevin, wrote in a blog post about not I don't think you quite phrase it as the failure of the Python launcher, or but your latest Why I Love UV post kind of called out the Python launcher. It's like I didn't quite live up to expectations. But the
To me,
funny thing
it
is the
is,
Python.
but not for the community. No, people don't know it exists. Hmm.
Yeah, well, so the funny thing is the Python launcher for Unix, I didn't do it for the community. I did it for me. So the Python launcher for Unix was actually my Rust learning project, and specifically to meet my workflow needs. But I open sourced it and put it out there because I realized, oh, there's probably some other people who want to use it, right? Like the Python launcher for Unix, for instance, automatically picks up as if there's a .venv directory with a virtual environment in there. Because that's the way I work, is whenever I create a virtual environment with python-m venv, I always name the directory .venv. That's also why VS Code picks it up that way. And well, and I run polls, like to be clear, I'm not trying to force my preference. It's just always my preference, and I validate it with in other ways. But anyway, um, I never had really any expectations for it. It was always just it's what I wanted, and so I did it the way I wanted to do it. In terms of its future, it really depends on my free time because it's once again my personal project. It's not shipping in box anywhere. It's in like Fedora has it and Homebrew has it. So if any like Linux distros or any of the Mac distros packaging managers package it up, that's usually how people get it. But it's not like it's shipping in box with anybody. But funny enough, a lot of the things UV's doing were goals I already had for the launcher. It's just UV Astral's got a way bigger development team than me. So they've managed to do a lot of things I wanted to do anyway. So given enough free time, I would still actually do a bunch of things that UV's ended up doing, but I do it for the Python launcher. Mainly so that A, we have a little bit of a backup, and but also B, I just want to because it'd be fun to do. And as I said, it's my personal project. No one else really works on it. And I just want to do it the way I want to do it. Um, so like inline script metadata, always create a virtual environment, potentially what pipx does in terms of installing tools and all that stuff, um, that kind of thing. I've always been tinkering in the back of my head, like, okay, like it's a great way of inline script metadata, but what happens if you point the launcher at like a directory, right? Like I don't know how many people realize that Python can only execute a script or execute a module with dash m that's on your sysdot path, but you can also point Python at a directory. as long as it has a .name.py file, or add a zip file as long as it has a .name.py file in it. And it's like, is there a reasonable way to go to take the idea of kind of the run command and have it also automatically pick up when you point at a directory or a zip file and go like, hey, you know what? There's a lock file in here. You know what? I'm going to just install that lock file and consider that what should go in the virtual environment that I create for running this code. Or, oh, there's a PyProject.toml in here. You know, I probably just need to install what's in there. Now, you can also have extra flags, just like, oh, I need this dependency group, or I need this extra or whatever, like PDM and UV have for a lot of this stuff. I don't know if Poetry has similar support yet. Um, but like a lot of this stuff is like stuff I would love to have. Like in my head, it was always like, okay, how do I cache pip, right? Because the other thing is like, I don't know about the rest of you, but so like when I create a virtual environment, I don't want to necessarily have to install pip every time and setup tools. Because actually, if you look at if anyone ever complains about the creation time of a virtual environment, it's actually the installing of setup tools and pip every time. If you leave those out, virtual environment creation is it's instantaneous. I have a whole blog post about this. It's effectively 4 directories and 3 symlinks, I think. If you leave out pip and setup tools, like it's really, really fast. I have a project called MicroVemv specifically for Debian users because they don't get Vev out of the box necessarily. And the VS Code needed a way to create virtual environments for those people. And so I was like, you know what? Why can't I just download pip? Because for those of you who don't know, there's actually a website. Well, it's not a website. It's a file host at bootstrap.pypa .io, and there's a pip.pyz file, and it's a zip file that contains everything necessary to run pip because pip is written in pure Python, and pip vendors all its dependencies. So running pip doesn't require installing anything, and it runs anywhere Python runs, right? So, like for instance, I'd love to make it so that I download and use that pip.pyz, but globally for the system or the user at least, so that I don't have to constantly upgrade my pip in each of my virtual environments. Like I really only need one because you can always point pip at either a directory or pip will actually just pick up the Python you're using to run it and install appropriately for that Python. So as long as the Python in the virtual environment is running that pip.pyz file, everything just works, right? Um, by the way, all of these plans are public. I'm an Obsidian user, and I use Obsidian Publish. So open source.snarky.ca typically has all my long-term random plans that I have, which I may never get to until I retire. But yeah, I mean, I have a lot of plans. It's just a matter of time. For instance, lock files have taken up a lot of time. I'm a dad now. That takes a lot of time. So it's one of those, am I getting enough sleep? Do I get enough time before I go to bed? Because there's a house rule. Brett can't code within 1 hour of going to bed because otherwise I don't sleep well. My brain doesn't shut off. So I have to have at least a 1 hour cool down. So being a dad trying to get the kid down to sleep and then having more than an hour before I need to get to bed to get enough sleep because I need a lot of sleep. I'm one of these people that if I don't get 8.5 hours at least, I'm a little groggy for the day, and I don't drink coffee. Uh, so it's just lack of time. But I'd love to because as I said, it's my personal Rust project. So it's how I keep up with Rust itself and just kind of keep myself on my toes and just try to learn other stuff. But it's also been so rock solid with the initial feature set that I've not had to do a 1 point anything release. Like all of my updates have been build to keep up and updates to the website. Like the fundamental code still works. But yeah, I've grand dreams that I don't know if I'll ever get to. But
Oh, that's
yeah,
actually
I think for UV it'd be nice to have I don't know. I don't want to say a competitor because like Hatch and PDM do a lot of what UV does and actually did it before they did it. But I think it would be nice to have a bootstrapping uh, thing that doesn't require Python to already be installed on the machine and to help with that kind of thing. Once again,
yeah.
I've had a long dream of wanting to do relocatable builds of Python
Mm.
and have those actually available from python.org, kind of like what the Python build standalone project does that UV downloads from. Like I've wanted that for ages, but there hasn't been enough interest to help me make it happen, and I don't have the build expertise to just do it myself. Like I had to learn or get help. Now, luckily, now that has taken maintainship over from IndieGreg, they've shown interest in trying to upstream some of their changes and all that. And I've gotten tacit sign off that, hey, if we can make this work, it wouldn't be such a bad idea to have at least development builds. I would still say it's best to get like the build of Python from like your Linux distro because they'll optimize it for their platform. But like for when that doesn't matter and you just need a quickie, I need this version on this OS and I don't care how I get it. I think it'd be great for us to have that kind of thing for Python itself. But once again, one of me, so there's only so much time. Luckily, Philippe Lanes is interested in this as well. But once again, I'm still worrying about lock files before I try to tackle relocatable builds that we make as part of the release process of Python. But
Yeah. And that would be actually quite awesome to have the same way to launch Python on all platforms. Right now, it's one of the biggest problems for beginners.
yep,
Starting Python is a very, very different thing on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And UV
yep,
kind of solves that, but it's a third-party tool. And I was really hoping 10 years ago for the Pi launcher to do that. I was hoping that
yep,
they eventually would move it to Mac and Linux, and we would have a Pi launcher to all platforms, and that it would
yeah.
be official and tied to the Python project and everything. There are no talks at all about making your project actually the general way of starting Python.
No, because I haven't done it because I don't have the bandwidth to support it that way.
Mm.
So no, there hasn't been any real talks about it specifically. But I think one of the interesting, I mean, one of the once again, dream, and it's one of the reasons I started the project so that projects can say, yeah, here the instructions say pi to really just do this, go get it for Windows here and Linux here or Unix here. Um, but yeah, I think one of the really interesting things that PDM and Hatch and UV have popularized is this idea that the interpreter is an implementation detail almost,
Mm.
right? Like what you really want here is a tool to make your code run, make your Python code run. And historically, the viewpoint, I think, of the whole community and definitely the core devs have been, oh, well, that tool is Python. But I think you can now abstract that out a step, right? Thanks to inline script metadata and PyProject.toml, because it's no longer it's declared up front now, like, hey, I need this version of Python, which may not be the version you have. So it kind of makes it a different abstraction layer of I have this Python code and I need to make it run, right? And with the old view of the Python interpreter, is like, okay, that's true to an extent, as long as that's A, the right version of Python, and B, you take the time to create your virtual environment to then install all your dependencies and then it works. But if you take that up a level of abstraction and go like, no, Python as an interpreter is part of the overall picture of creating the Python environment that your code needs to run, then this is where you end up with PDM and Hatch and UV, where you just don't need to have to worry about those kinds of details, and it just kind of pulls it back. But yeah, so I don't know. There haven't been discussions. I haven't brought it up because it's just me. No one else works on it because partially because it is in Rust. It's not an official Python. It's not an official core Python project. Rust is not a language that most people know on the core team. Everyone on the core team knows Python. A decent chunk, but actually not everyone knows C. And that's kind of where then it just drops. And then it's who the hell knows what language everyone else knows. As I said, I did it in Rust. I am not re-implementing it in C. Theoretically, there might be a way to do some bootstrapping somehow to write it in Python and then somehow ship it with a C Python build. It's actually been one of the weird potentials for the WASM build of Python is if somehow the WASI community gets a way to package up a WASI build in a way that is more more portable than a Python build in terms of shipping with code in it. Um, I haven't really looked into it yet, Brassy or not. I mean, theoretically, you could freeze all of this into the Python interpreter and make it all launch that way and basically just do it your own custom C app that just embeds the Python interpreter. And that'd be one way to do this. And that way it's just, oh, look, we've got builds for all of these platforms and it's literally just shipping with Python in box and you're all good to go. I mean, that'd be one way to potentially do it. But once again, time.
We had the Keith Maggie on the show, and he said that he was working on Briefcase for that to allow, of course, the ability to package Python in a lot of different formats, which is something that is dearly missing. If you code in Rust, there are very good libraries to just push a button and say, give me a deb, give me an exe, give me an app image.
Yep.
And so this makes writing Rust and publishing Rust very nice. Right now, writing Python is fantastic. Publishing Python library is good, but publishing end users application in Python is still very, very complicated for most people. And even as a developer, sometimes I just don't do it because, I say, how do I really, really want to make a deb out of that? No, I'm just going to make some kind of app image or something easy to do.
Yeah, and Russell, I think, is doing a great service for the community with Beware and trying to make all that work. And thanks to Anaconda for funding him to work on that full time. But I mean, that's also a huge project too, because I mean, the crazy thing with what Russell's trying to do is Beware is not just Briefcase, it's also Toga, right? Like it's not just how do we package up Python into applications for Android or iOS or desktop or CLI or whatever format you want, but he's also trying to do a cross-platform UI library for Python from scratch, right? That works on web and every other platform. And so, I mean, I sometimes think I'm ambitious and I stop and think about what Russell's been trying to do. And it's like, okay, maybe I'm not that ambitious. Russell might take the crown for most ambitious project out there. But yeah, no, it's a long-standing problem, right? Like if you ever look at effectively a lot of like these top language listings and rankings and all that. I think it's the IEEE one that specifically lists like where there are gaps in each of the languages. And the one gap Python consistently has is mobile and web, right? Because we're not JavaScript and we're not a compiled language like Rust or Go or whatever that compiled down to a self-contained binary. And it's one of these things of Russell's working on it. And I think everyone's always hoped Russell can make it work. But it's also one of those, now that Russell's a core dev, hopefully he'll be able to get whatever he needs to make it happen and make it easier on himself and he can get the support he needs. But once again, it's Russell and I don't remember the name of his teammate that works with him at Anaconda on Beware. But like it's two people, right? It's one of these things where I don't think people realize the funding crunch that Python's persistently under, right? Like a lot of people go like, "Oh, look at all the people working at Microsoft on faster Python, or all the people working at Meta on free threading, right?" And all this. And like that's fantastic. Like don't get me wrong, I am fully appreciative that any of these companies have put any amount of money into this, right? Like even if it ended tomorrow, like it's still really appreciated. Like any of this funding lasted for years. But it's all very specifically for the performance of Python on server context, right? Or just in general, like Fastly Python is not specifically geared towards that, but it's still very specifically towards perf. But if you look at packaging, and there's packaging for like stuff that ends up on PyPI, and then there's the packaging as we're talking about now of like applications. There's not money being thrown into that. Like the reason Astral came onto the scene with UV and kind of like, oh my God, everyone took a look and like, oh my God, look at this stuff, even though PDM and Hatch had been doing it already, was they move so fast, right? They have paid staff. like Hatch with Ophic and PDM with Frost and Poetry with Randy and a couple other people, like I don't think any of them are getting paid to work on this stuff. I think they're doing it in their free time, or they're maybe getting like 20% kind of time at work versus Astral that's got like it has VC money to pay staff to just work on UV full time. And I think that's kind of why there's acceleration. NVIDIA has a bunch of people getting involved in packaging, right? Like Emma and Barry Warsaw, and I know I'm forgetting at least one other person. Oh God, mine's blanking. But they have a couple of people now working on PyPA packaging, right? So there's some interest, but this is around the wheel, like PyPI level packaging stuff. It's not how do we make Python into an app that I can just have someone double click to install, right? Or even a CLI, like pre-built single self-contained binary that I can just take and just say, hey, here's the weird shell script you're supposed to curl and pass to shell, which is horrible security, but we all know we do it. Or here's the thing to get into Homebrew that'll just get down and just you can use this to manage your Python installs and stuff. It's not something people have focused on, partially because there has been money behind it. And as I said, luckily Anaconda's funding Russell, but Russell's ambitions are huge, right? As I said, it's not only just packaging this kind of stuff up for this, but also the GUI on top of it all. So if you want to help make this happen, go help Russell.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, like it's once again one of those projects that I'd love to see solved, but it's one of those things also where people have to kind of come together and either fund it or put the people behind it to make it happen. And historically, people just haven't cared or worried about it. Once again, like inline script metadata, right? Making it so that tools have a way to read it to automatically do those installs. It seems like a stupidly obvious thing to have done. But it didn't happen until PipX did it, and Pip Run, Jason Goom's project, also had it. But then it was always just in those projects. And then I said, hey, it would be great if we standardize this, because if we did, we could add it to VS Code. And then Paul Moore said, okay, sure, and wrote PEP 722. And then Ofik Lev of Hatch said, like, I'd rather have it in TOML instead of a domain-specific language, and he did PEP 723. And then I foolishly volunteered to be the PEP delegate for both to make it say no, sorry to one person and yes, please to the other. But then we did it, and now suddenly we have it, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, this is amazing! Like we should have had this ages ago." It was always a gap between I wrote this one-off script that just runs in with the standard library, and then a full package that's a PyProject.toml, and we had this gap in the middle, and no one had just had the time to just sit down and go like, "There's a gap." I mean, we knew there was a gap, but it was sitting down and going like, "How do we fill the gap?" Right? Like Nathaniel Smith when he was doing Posey. If you remember when he was pushing that around, which was an early like, how do I get builds of Python available and trying to do it using the wheel mechanism before I think he went and started to work at Anthropic. He wrote this huge thing up and was like, yeah, here's one of the gaps, right? Is they going from a script that you just point Python to full blown PyProject.toml that lists everything in this fully structured package. There's no middle ground for that. I need more than just a standard library, but I don't need a full blown thing. How do I make that work? And then finally, it's just someone put the time and effort to make it happen, and then we just kind of all work together to make it all happen and become a thing. But once again, time and effort, and just people stepping up to just put that kind of time and effort in, and the people involved, all volunteers, I think, to an extent. I mean, work let me do it as a PEP delegate, but it's not my full-time job at work to do this stuff. So it's still one of those just people stepping up and just helping out to help make it happen, because the vast majority of this community, a lot of this stuff, and especially packaging, unless you work for Astral, is still volunteer. And it's just time and effort. And as I said, thank God Russell's got Anaconda money now to fund him. But still, 2 people for that whole thing. It's not enough to make that move fast. So
the
it's
hard
tough.
part is not the packaging itself, because we're not that far from here, right? We have inline dependencies, we have indie greg builds. Well, Python build standalone now. We have a way to do a zip app. We have a lot of the components, and actually UV Astral created a project to have, well, I don't know if they created a side project for that, or if they, no, I think they have it in UV, but they have a way to export a log file, which is cross-platform. So it works for, it takes care of every little OS that is there, and you can install your project from the log file. So it means that we have pretty much all the components to do that, but there are after that the signing part, and the signing part is making things very complicated, like not making things working on Windows and on Mac nowadays without having some screen preventing you from executing things is quite hard.
Yeah, and then on top of it, I know Charlie hates this. Charlie Marsh, the founder of Astral. But there's also always the whole VC concern and who do you trust, right? Like, for instance, with the Python standard library, I'm a vocal proponent of trimming down the standard library. I view old code as technical debt, right? That's my view. And unless you have the time and energy to maintain it, it bit rots, and it's all going to be technical debt that you have to maintain, which has costs. Other people, though, are like, no, you should never take anything out of the standard library for two reasons. One, you might break people, but two, a lot of people end up in this weird scenario where, for legal reasons or what have you, they can't install anything outside of Python. And I'm personally one of these people who've always argued that shouldn't necessarily be our concern, but for some people and some organizations, it's a real worry, like legal worry that, oh my God, anything outside of Python, you have to go to the lawyers to get clearance to use and stuff. Very locked down systems. It's really hard to get approval to use anything, right? And so it becomes one of these things of like, okay, how do we work this up so that the disparate system, we're in places where people feel they can trust the system, but also just maybe a little less disparate systems. But also, let's be honest, before Astral took over Python build standalone, it was just IndieGreg maintaining all that. And that can lead to burnout. And that's one person. If he suddenly stepped down, like, before Astral stepped in, like, I don't think he was keeping up with all the releases. It took him a little while to get to them, which totally understand. No shade being thrown here at all. But there's costs here. And once again, what happens if poor Charlie loses all his funding? Okay, now we're back to step one of no one's maintaining it because Astral's got staff that could suddenly disappear. Like, I don't know how many members of Astral would want to keep doing what they're doing in their spare time, right? Like, who's going to take over Python build standalone if Astral suddenly didn't maintain it, right? This is one of the reasons I want to get this kind of upstream such that eventually, as part of our release process, there is one Linux build, there is a Windows build, there's a Mac build, and any other tier one and hopefully tier two platforms that the CPython core team supports, we can push out a binary that might not be performance optimized for every single platform. Because like Python build downloads is like 500 builds per release. But I don't think it's crazy to think maybe we do 5 or something. And just have those available for people for development to make it easier to just get up and going. It's just like, how do we have safeguards in place for the community to make sure like all this stuff continues to function in case that one critical person burns out and falls off? Like Russell's talked about him dealing with stuff in his life. Like I've fought with burnout as well, right? Like I'm somewhat known for not talking to anyone online on weekends, and I have an annual detox where I do that for a whole month, right? Where I literally disconnect, and the open source I do is for me only, and I don't talk to anyone about it, and I only do whatever I have to keep up with work requirements. But otherwise, I don't do any extraneous anything to make sure I don't burn out. But not everyone does that for themselves, and so it leads to burnout. People disappear, right? Like, and I'm not going to name people who have burned out because it's their business. I don't want to get upset with them, but It's happened. It's not a hypothetical. People have walked away, and other people have had to step up and pick up pieces. And I'm one of the people who've had to pick up some pieces from this. So I think it's something where, as a community, we have to constantly evaluate, like, what do we have to do to make sure that key people don't leave, and also make sure they're supported such that they don't, and to make sure we have contingency plans in place so that if they do leave, because God forbid they die, this has happened. People have suddenly died and disappeared. Like it's not, it's a little morbid, but it all happens. I mean, accidents, what have you. What do we have in place to make sure that we can keep these systems running for the community and everyone else? And I don't know if everyone's thought that through. And it's a slight worry of mine that we are still too dependent on key people and key companies to make sure that we don't keep we have a way to pick up the pieces if something were to seriously happen to someone or something.
And
So,
as you said, securing Python build standalone is very important, not just from the human point of view, but also from the technical point of view that once they become very, very popular, people are going to use them and use the bandwidth that go with it. And if we watch the popularity of PyP.org and how much bandwidth it consumes, I have
oh
to
yeah.
assume that once UV is used everywhere, it's going to consume petabytes of downloads. And I'm not sure they have the infrastructures of the way to bear the cost of that. But you have Fastly, I think, or I do believe, or somebody that is sponsoring.
Yeah, so for PyPI, all of that bandwidth is donated in kind by Fastly. So massive thank you to Fastly. Talk to anyone from the PSF or anyone who's worked on PyPI, and they will tell you Fastly has been an amazing partner in all this. Like they donate the equivalent of millions of dollars, millions of CDN bandwidth for PyPI. So thank you for them. Like I have personally thanked their CTO before to say thank you for doing this. Oh yeah, you're welcome. But this was also years and years and years ago. But like that matters a lot. For Python build standalone, I think they're all on GitHub Actions. So like I think their hosting is just GitHub.
Right, so GitHub is paying
So
the bill. So basically, your
I
employer is paying the bill.
I think so. I mean, you'd have to ask Charlie or
I
someone at
think that.
Astral to clarify where the URLs point.
Mm.
But I think like I've seen them comment like one of the problems they have is there's a limited number of files you can attach to a release on GitHub, and I think they bump up to that with the number of builds that they do per release. So yeah, I think it might be GitHub. Um, but yeah, once again, one of these things of what do we have to do to make sure that everything keeps functioning so that if someone changes their mind about wanting to support something, um, which is totally within their right, that everything just keeps running smoothly for everybody else. Um, yeah.
And so we've been talking a lot about Rust recently. UV is in
Hmm.
Rust, the PyLauncher is in Rust, and
Yep.
we have even a Rust implementation for Python now, which is Rust Python. It's not very
Hmm.
compatible yet, but it's getting there. What's your experience with Rust as a language, as a complement of Python and even completely independent of Python? Um,
Yeah. So I think I once put this uh, in a flow chart that I put online. Um, my decision tree of when to use a programming language for a project. It first goes, is Python a good fit? Luckily, it almost always is, so that makes that decision easy. But sometimes it's not. And the next question is Rust a better fit? And then after that, what's probably like the domain specific language that's the best fit for something? And I view Rust very much as a complementary language, not a supplementary language. Um, I know C really well, thanks to working on Python's interpreter for so long. And C is fine, but let's be honest, C can be tricky to work with, and it doesn't have a lot of guardrails to make sure you don't shoot yourself in the foot, and it's a security risk. And so when Rust came out, I looked at it from a systems language perspective, and I thought they did a good job. I happen to like functional languages. So I really like the little touches that Rust has in terms of supporting a functional style of programming. I appreciate how it tries to be performant while being safe as well. And so for me, I think Rust is great for those scenarios where you need a systems language and to do something. Now, once again, I still prefer Python, and I'll still pick Python over Rust any day, but I also have massive bias, to be fair. Um, but I don't, Python just doesn't work in all scenarios. As we've discussed, right? Like we're still solving app distribution problems, right? That Rust doesn't have because it compiles down to a single binary. So sometimes Rust can be a better solution. Bootstrapping, right? Unless we come up with I mean, once again, without necessarily saying just go use Briefcase, there's some scenarios where it's just easier to use Rust. And let's be honest, you're not about to write an OS in Python because sometimes you just need something that does not have a garbage collector, period. It just is the way it is. Um, and that's okay. Um, Not every language is going to solve all problems. Python might be the second best language at everything, but sometimes you just need the best language. And that just sometimes means not Python. And for me, when you need a systems language, Python is just not going to work. And that's fine. And for me, right now, Rust is my choice. Now, I still learn all other languages for fun, like Elixir and the Beam, right? And Gleam and all the other Beam-based languages. Like for anyone who wants to really see what crazy distributed concurrency can distributed systems can do in terms of fault tolerance, you should definitely look at what the Beam can do. Um, but once again, it doesn't solve all the problems. And so for me, Rust just fills a niche, right? That Python just doesn't do. And I think it's okay to understand that and to use Rust. And I think it's a great language to use in those scenarios where you need that system language. Because I think a problem we have in the community is people assuming Python is slow. And so they do it in Rust or C or Fortran or whatever first and then they wrap it and then someone comes along and says this is too much work, I want it in Python, and then they wrap it instead of doing, you know what, let's do it in Python first and then let's see where the bottlenecks are, right? And then if you happen to have a situation where there is truly a bottleneck that you really cannot code around in Python by just using a better algorithm or a better data structure, that's where I think today reaching for Rust makes sense, right? Because Rust plays very nicely with Python because it doesn't have a garbage collector. And I think it's easier to do properly than C because you have to know a lot to make C work well and not have a mistake that's going to cost you a nasty seg fault compared to learning Rust and having Rust worry about that on your behalf. So that's where I think it fits in, right? The whole do it in Python first if you can, figure out where the bottleneck is, try to do better algorithms, better data structures, and if you still got a bottleneck, or you have to wrap something, do it in Rust and just try to live your best life in Python as much as possible. And I think the Rust community's done a great job with that.
Okay, and what's your
That was
experience?
very rambly. I'm sorry.
No, it's that's the goal of the podcast for you to ramble on it. That's kind of what people are listening to.
Yeah,
So what's your experience with Rust as a coder?
it's great. I like it a lot. I really appreciate that the Rust community has a very strong code of conduct. I very much appreciate that the community tries to be very friendly and welcoming. Um, I think I think they took a lot of lessons learned from other languages and communities up front, such as having a strong code of conduct, having cargo, having crates.io, right? Like this is one of the funny things in packaging, right? When Chandler's like, well, why can't you just have a cargo? It's like, you do know they learned that lesson to have that from us, right? Like once again, same thing with like NPM, right? Like we predate all of these packaging solutions where everyone's like, can't you be like them? It's like, you do know they learned from us what to do and what not to do. Anyway, um, so I think they just nailed a lot of things right up front, and I think the design decisions they've made about what their place in the programming language ecosystem is, and they've really stuck to it, right? Like once again, a very fast, safe systems language that doesn't have a garbage collector. And I know fearless concurrency is also another one of those things, but I personally haven't really delved into the threads side of it too much. I know they're still working on async and trying to make that work. They kind of did async the way we did it, where there's not a built-in event loop. You have to bring your own. And I think they're still working through that in the syntax. Anyway, so yeah, I think does a great job for those scenarios where you need to reach for a systems language. Now I know the infamous borrow checker can be a bit of a pain, and you have to kind of learn to do that. But I typically argue that um, what Rust makes you do is something you already inherently do with C and C++. It's just not enforced by the compiler. And so I don't think any of it's necessarily wrong or bad. It just might make you have to be a little bit more verbose in the way you write things because the compiler is telling you, no, no, you need to declare up front that you're doing something you inherently did implicitly with C and C++, because I'm going to make sure you don't do something silly. But yeah, I think it's a great language. When you need a systems language, obviously for a lot of people that never comes up, understandably. But yeah, if you do, I think it's definitely worth considering.
With Rust slowly getting inside the Linux kernel, do you see a future for Rust in the Python source code? Would you wish it would have a future in the Python source code?
So I've joked with actual members of the Rust team because there's a lot of overlap with Rust in the WebAssembly world. That my retirement project is to try to slowly rewrite CPython in Rust. But the tricky bit here is I think it's the same problem that the Linux kernel is running into of how do you take a team who have deep knowledge in a programming language, in this case C, and suddenly have them learn a whole new one in order to be productive. And it's not saying that the motivation's wrong, but there's cultural from a project perspective, cultural issues to get over. And I think it's even harder for Python because what the Linux kernel is trying to do is they're trying to get Rust into the drivers space, right? Not necessarily in the core right now.
Yeah.
So because of that, because the Linux kernel is developed in such a way that there's, I think fiefdoms is the wrong word, but there's lots of sub projects almost within the Linux kernel, right? Because there's the core kernel, and then you have the drivers and each of those subsystems. And each of those subsystems have their own person running them, and they're in charge of that API and all the code that gets committed in that subsystem, right? And then all kind of propagates up to Linux and whoever's in charge of the releases, right? So, from my understanding, assuming I'm not wrong, is because of that, that allows the Linux kernel to bring in Rust slowly from the leaves, right? And only the people working in those leaves need to understand Rust. We don't have that in Python, in CPython specifically, right? CPython is
You could do, for example, CPython in English. Yeah, CPython would be something that is completely independent for the Python source code, and you would be able to say, okay, this accelerator from the stdlib in particular could be a playground or something, and it would be independent.
yes and no, because we don't have independent ownership. Of subsections of the language by design and on purpose, it doesn't really play out that way. So once again, because people own subsystems in Linux, that person can say, I'm okay with Rust. But we have emphatically specified from the steering council that no one owns any corner of Python's code base, CPython's code base. It is generally owned by everybody. We can't make quite that same statement. So you're right. The code could be isolated at the leaves, right? Like you could have an extension module if you're willing to bring in that extra build dependency, which is also complicated, right? Because we've worked very hard to keep Python buildable on any relatively modern C compiler, right? Like we only require C11. on purpose so that it's easy to build once again to put on any esoteric system you need as long as they got a decent C compiler. But for instance, CPython doesn't have an owner. No one owns CPython, right? The code owner's file in Python doesn't imply someone owns it and like they can gatekeep. It's I care about this enough that if something comes up, I want to know about so I can help out. And I happen to have the most domain knowledge, but that doesn't mean anyone outside of that code owner's file that's a core dev can't touch that file, right? Like for imports, I am listed in code owners for the import system. That doesn't mean someone else can't come in and make a change. It just means I want to get notified and they know they can come to me and ask questions because I have very deep innate knowledge of how the import system works still. But if someone want to come in and change something, they don't have to go through me. It's not required. They can totally do it on their own. Now, whether someone would view that as rude or not is depends on what the change is. But it's not required. And because of that general code ownership, it's I think a different case for Python, CPython versus the Linux kernel to be able to say like, hey, yeah, let's just introduce Rust and say I don't know how many of us know Rust that are core devs, 5, 10, especially among the active ones. I don't know. Um, okay, now anything that's in Rust, you have to own explicitly. It's not the whole team anymore. Makes things a bit more complicated. So I think it's a theoretical possibility if Rust gets so popular that C slowly becomes a niche language. And so having people join the team as core developers to work on the interpreter becomes hard because we can't find anyone who wants to volunteer and join because they don't know C, but they do know Rust. That I think would lead to a potential shift. But until that happens, it's going to be a bit hard.
Yes, and it's not like it's needed because it works that
Yeah.
way.
Well, I mean, and another thing is literally just the build system, right? Like once again, we pride ourselves on the fact that we only require a C11 compiler, right? Which is pretty easy to get on any platform, so we're easy to build almost anywhere. If you pull in Rust, now it's wherever you can get a Rust build on top of that. Like we are so stuck adamant. I don't know what word you want to choose. So dedicated, we'll go with dedicated, to being easy to build on any platform that we use an old version of AutoConf. That's so old, we have to have a dedicated Docker container just to run the old version because it's AutoConf. So 1.69 versus like the latest one's like 1.73 or 5 or something. Like we're that adamant that yeah, if you want to touch AutoConf, we have a make target that basically launches Docker, downloads this Docker container that has the old version of AutoConf, runs it, mounts the source, runs it, updates it, and then shuts down, right? So the idea of bringing in Rust as a new requirement is like a whole nother realm. Like we gotta honestly, we'd have them update, I think, our whole build system before we worried about Rust. And we haven't even done that. Like we've had discussions about getting off of auto tools and maybe switching off of make and autoconf to do everything. But we haven't even gotten past that because once again, everyone's got opinions and will it make it easier or harder for people to do builds? What tool do you choose? Will it work for our crazy build requirements? Because once again, old project means we've got a long list of things that our configure file checks for that are been there for ages. I don't even know if we've ever audited to make sure all those checks are even still necessary, right? Like it's just complicated and hard with a project this big, this old, and where we just don't have that project structure to just allow someone to just go like, no, I'm going to do Rust over here. And it was okay. Like, nah, it just isn't set up that way.
Yes, and
Once again, if I was retired, I'd do it myself and just see how bad it was, and then come back and say, hey, everybody, look, I've done it, or half of it. And look, this is not so bad. This is kind of cool. Look, this part of the API is now done in Rust. And now we have less security concerns about having a buffer overflow over here or what have you. Right. Or, oh, hey, we could make this threaded way easier now versus not wanting to do it threaded in C because threaded C code is a pain. Um, But I think we've got bigger concerns over like free threading in the JIT and getting a new build system than we do about switching to Rust.
True. And a good way to annoy a C programmer is tell them to do some work that actually brings nothing in the on the table for the next 20 years, while they've got a lot
Hmm.
of work to do right now. I mean, don't fix what's not
Yeah, and
broken.
once again, for a project like ours, where while it's amazing, I totally appreciate and love the fact that we have developers in residence. We have developers in residence now, and we have people getting paid to work on things. Porting us over to Rust right now is not something anyone's getting paid to work to even consider, to my knowledge.
Mm.
So,
Have you looked at Rust Python source code a little bit?
no, I mean, I've looked at the project. I know their big goal originally, at least, was they were trying to re-implement CPython's uh, bytecode interpreter, and I don't know if that's actually going to be the easiest or best way to go about it. Because the other thing is obviously the C API also has to work, right? So you're going to have to wrap the C API in such a way that, as exposed from Rust, that it'll carry over, or else you're going to end up in the same position everyone else does, where it's like it's fantastic that you've re-implemented Python and whatever, but that doesn't necessarily carry over. Um, I mean, honestly, um, my whole blog post series on syntactic sugar and how it ended in that blog post where I defined MVPy, the minimum viable Python, was specifically to figure out what the minimum requirements were to re-implement the interpreter potentially in Rust, because then it's easier to compile straight to WebAssembly and to do what needs to happen in a WebAssembly interpreter for Python, or to potentially compile straight to something as a compile target. Um, so I guess you could say I've started working on it. It's going to potentially take decades, but that's actually what the whole blog post series was for. Um, it just so happens it's ended up just being really helpful to Astral for their type checker.
Good.
And other people just find it really interesting. But that was actually the impetus for it, was to figure out exactly what the minimum, what was the minimum subset of the language required in order to fully implement the language through source transforms, so that that's actually the target of re-implementation if I was ever try to re-implement the language in something.
Talking to some about something completely different now. We
Hmm.
mentioned like uh, passing by PyManager, which is the proposal to make a future installer for Python and sunset the
Hmm.
old installer. Are you
Yep.
involved a little bit in that on that? And can what can you tell us about it?
I'm only involved from the perspective of Steve Dower, who's driving that as a coworker, and he and I have talked about it, and he knows I did. I actually wrote the Python launcher for Unix, and he wrote the Python launcher for Windows, and so we sometimes chat. Like he had me look at the map and go like, "All right, anything here, if we were ever to try to make it work for Unix, is it a red flag of whether it would work or not?" Right? Otherwise, I'm just another core dev that he's just bounced an idea off of. But for those of you who don't know, effectively, Steve's proposal is to have an app that you download from python.org that manages your Python install on Windows for you. So and it's going to have a CLI. I think there's planned for a GUI as well. I think there's a GUI already.
Or is
And
there?
basically, it's and it's actually I think it's actually written in Python, and it just uses the embedded Python install to make it all work. But basically, it's designed such that you can just say, kind of like you do with Hatch and PDM and UV, to use the Python build standalones builds. Just say like, hey, I need blank version of Python. And then it just goes and gets it and downloads it and installs it, and it just use it to be the way that you get Python. And it's also designed to automatically get the newest version by default, so you don't at least don't have to have a two-step install this and then tell it to go install things. Like, no, install this and it'll automatically on launch, excuse me, install the newest version of Python. But that's it. It's basically because Windows is works the way it works in terms of backwards compatibility and stuff, and Steve's had Windows builds, static builds of Python for ages. He's already got the infrastructure in place to be able to make this work. And this is why I said like a dream of mine is to have relocatable builds for Mac and Linux.
Mm.
Because as soon as we have that, we then have a complete story for the major OSs that we support as tier one. Um, to be able to have a similar experience on other places. And because Steve's design includes uh, the Python launcher for Windows, also basically being an alias almost to, to the PyManager solution, there's nothing saying we can also then potentially do a Py install for Linux and Mac, whether it's my version or we do another rewrite from scratch and try to make it completely cross-platform. As I said, somehow you're doing it in Python and somehow making a single binary. Um, and then we do that, and that's how we get this single tool that does all the installs and manages your install for you, and kind of almost our version of Rust up of getting Python on your machine, and that's how you run it. And I don't know if it'd ever necessarily have the run command, but maybe it could, and we'd use pip probably, because once again, you don't have to worry about whether Rust is available on the platform or something, because for instance, UV isn't available. I mean, both tools are not available as libraries. UV, for instance, doesn't publish crates for their stuff. You have to download the binary and run it. But obviously, as long as you can get Python on your machine, pip will work. So chances are probably would be a pip thing. But I mean, it's a dream. So, but yeah, so that's what Steve's doing. It's kind of like the Windows step to this bigger, grand, ambitious dream I have of, yeah, making it so that Python build standalone is more of a optimized build kind of thing, while baseline developer installs can come from python.org, and we can start maybe having some tools that kind of help you do more of a rust up style. Here's how you can get stuff installed for the Python version.
And since when you type Python right now, it's opening the store, and the idea is to actually replace that. Is there any talk at Microsoft to actually make typing Python tell you, whoa, use PyManager instead of opening the store?
I don't know. That's a Steve question. Steve's the one who talks to the Windows team about all this stuff, so I'm not involved in any of that.
Then I'm going to invite Steve next month to the podcast, and we're going to answer this question. All right. Talking about Microsoft, do you have any interaction between your work at Microsoft and your work as core dev? How does that work?
Only so much as Microsoft gives me some time to work on it as a core dev and never tells me what to do. Not really. I mean, Microsoft's been really good about that. Basically, so before I joined Microsoft, I worked at Google. And when I came and joined Microsoft, my manager at the time put in my contract that I would get 20% time to work on open source. And Microsoft also realizes that Python's used enough that we should make sure it keeps working. And also, I do internal consulting at the company, so obviously it's good for me to continue to understand how Python works. So that's basically it. I mean, really, I've never had, I mean, if the question is, has the company ever asked me to do anything? Then the answer is no. I mean, for instance, lock files. The company didn't ask me to work on lock files. I chose to work on lock files because I knew it would actually be good for the community, but also side benefit helps the company because we have this whole Secure Future Initiative, SFI, which is trying to just make software more secure. And if you look at like the lock files pip tools does by default, they're not secure, right? There's no hashes. And basically you have to do three things to do a secure install from a requirements file. You have to tell pip, you have to include all the hashes in the file. Four things actually. You have to then tell pip when it installs from the requirements file that hashes are required, that you only want to install from wheels, and that you should not try to install anything that's not listed in the requirements file. I actually have a GitHub action specifically that does nothing but just adds those three flags so that to make sure that any requirements file that uses a log file does that. And then my log file proposal actually mandates all this. And actually goes a little farther too, because it also requires file size to prevent any just denial of service attack, or just to make sure that hash plus file size is pretty good guarantee that you're getting exactly the bits you expect. But work didn't tell me to do that. I just said, hey, I want to work on this. I think it's good for security reasons. Like, okay, cool. And honestly, most of the time I don't even have to necessarily even get clearance for it. I just say, hey, this is what I'm going to spend some of my time on. And they generally just trust me not to do anything stupid. Yeah. Yeah, no, Works never said, do this, please.
All right.
Like, never come up once. And I think they know that if they did, I'd quit. Um, like I've always said, the Python community comes first, then my job. And if work ever asked me to compromise anything for the community, I'd quit. So they've never done it. So if you ever see me randomly quit, you can ask if that was why. Chances are no. I've never had that happen at work. It never happened ever. At worst, they would go like, "Hey, can you try to make packaging better? We're having this pain point." And I'd go yes or no. And if it's yes, it's because I agree that, yeah, that's a pain point. I'm glad I'm getting time to work on it. Right. But that's never happened. It's always been, I've proactively just decided like I need to work on this because I see the pain at work for this thing. So let's go solve it.
So you've not been involved with, for example, Python in Excel at all? Like who is working on that
Nope.
at Microsoft right now?
That was Guido.
Oh, that was Guido. Oh, really?
Yeah, so the Excel team basically said we're planning to do this, and then Guido acted as a consultant basically on that, and just worked with them to make sure that they did a good job and were able to help them with that and all that. But I didn't get involved.
Okay. And they have a partnership with Anaconda, right? Because it runs on Anaconda Cloud or something.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know all the technical details. I don't know the details of that. I believe they're using Anaconda behind the scenes, and that's how they say what the compatibility level is. I think. I'm not involved in it.
It seems to be as um, quite the standard to have the company employing people working on Python to not ask them to do anything. Like Russell Kefmagi said the same thing about Anaconda. He said that
Yep.
he was really free to do what was important, but not told what to do. And I think it shows great spirit from the sponsor that we're having right now.
Yeah, I think it's one of the nice side effects of having already sunk so much of our lives into open source ahead of time is when you've kind of proven yourself that way. I think it means companies trust you to do the right thing. And because they view it as an important thing to have done, they're just going to pay your salary to make sure you get the time and space to do it. Versus, you know what, we want to see this happen. We have to now go find someone to do it and to make it happen. Right. So, like, it's great that Russell's getting funded by Anaconda because Anaconda views a business reason for them to have Beware work, right? Same thing with me, I think, and Steve I think Microsoft just sees enough of a business case of we should have them on staff for whatever reason, internal consulting, make sure Python on Windows works, keep Python just generally working because there's just enough Python in the company now that we also don't want it to completely collapse, et cetera, that it behooves them to keep us staffed and employed. And there's enough of a symbiotic scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of thing in terms of we'll give you a salary for you to keep doing what you're doing. You just have to occasionally you just, as part of it, talk to internal teams or work on tooling. Like when I was the manager for VS Code, right? Just, hey, can you help make sure that Python works great in the world's most popular editor? Sure, I'm happy to do that, right? So it's just one of those things where it's just worked out that in this case, I get to work on Python related stuff that brings benefit to the community. And once again, they've never asked me to do anything nefarious. As I said, ever really asked me to do anything other than, hey, can you make sure Python's great in VS Code? Sure. Can you go talk to this team who's doing some Python to give them some advice on how to do Python well? Sure. Like, that's the kind of stuff I get asked to do by work. It's never public, hey, can you be on the steering council to make this change happen? That's never, ever, ever happened. Like, they didn't even ask me to be on the steering council. I chose to be on the steering council.
And superb job at that, by the way, and to the VS Code
Thanks.
team as well, because before VS Code, PyCharm was the only editor to have a decent support for Python, and VS Code caught up without being as heavy as PyCharm, with being able to be free because there is no PyCharm community edition, VS Code community edition versus private edition whatsoever. So it really, really opened up the Python ecosystem to a lot of people to have such a quality code completion, code injection, things like that. That was really fantastic.
Yeah, and the team that I was put in charge of was given the freedom to do whatever we needed to do to make that happen, right? Like, once again, there was never any edict of how to do it. It was just go make Python, go make VS Code the most popular editor for Python development. Like, just go do the best you can. Like, and it's like, okay. And I was lucky enough that it was viewed enough as an important thing that we got the headcount we needed to make it happen. We hired Don Giamatti, who started the extension, and it was he and I for a while. Then we got some more people on the team, and they got our largest. Was it 6 people and me, I think? Um, on top of like funding Pylance and DebugPy and just getting all the tooling working and going and all that. And yeah, it really, I'd like to think paid off. Like, Python is still very much the number one extension on the marketplace by downloads. If you go look, it's by a huge margin. And people seem to generally be happy. And the surveys always seem to put us as the number one editor, which is great. And so yeah, I think it turned out rather well. I mean, I stopped being the manager back in September, because I wanted to go back to being an IC, but I'd like to think I left the team in a good spot and they continue to do well. And yeah, I think we managed to make it work and make people not question it and think it wasn't good or anything like that. I think we really got into a spot where people are like, no, this is a good experience and it's worth coming to VS Code for. Versus, oh, I'm on VS Code and I'm stuck doing Python. At least it doesn't suck.
And sharing that through language server protocol also was a boon to open source, because now Sublime Text and
Mm-hmm.
other editors like VI and Emacs, they've got good support for language completion because
Yeah.
because we have the LSP basically.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's an interesting thing too, because when you look at VS Code, right, like a lot of I mean, once again, VS Code doesn't really get edicts from work to do this or that to make it successful. It's just go be successful. And and it made sense to go like, not everyone's going to want to write stuff in TypeScript, right? So how do we make it so that all these other language ecosystems want to come work with VS Code when VS Code was the underdog? Well, you do the language server protocol or the debugger adapter protocol, right? Where it's like, okay, you have this protocol that you talk over a local socket with a binary that can be written in any language. And that's how you get all your editor features for a language, whether it's go to definition or completions or what have you. And because VS Code's very much an open source project and very much lives that ethos, it was all just like, yeah, this is not specific to us. We're totally gonna make it all open and very clear and not try to own it in any way, shape, or form. This is not what the tool cares about. So it did, and it's great that other editors have taken it on because once again, it kind of makes it easy for a tool to go like, yeah, you know what, I want to add good editor support, but I don't want to pigeonhole myself just into one editor. It's like, no, if I do it for LSP or DAP or whatever, it's suddenly all these other editors light up like NeoVim and et cetera. And it's great. Like, I mean, that's fantastic. Once again, it's not you can either try to lock people in or you can try to make it so everyone has an equal experience everywhere and you try to win for other reasons. Right. And I think that's what VS Code has done is we don't want you to come to us because you feel locked in. We want you to come to us because we are the best at what we do. And that's why you want to come work with us and use the tool. And one way to do that is just to be open and equal with everyone else. And we just happen to have other just design or whatever that just makes you want to go, yeah, you know what? I might be able to use the same tool over here, but the experience is just better because of X, Y, and Z here. And so I'm going to go use VS Code. And it seems like in general, people agree, which is great.
I think I have a list, of all the questions I wanted to ask you, and I think we're getting down to it right now. It's done. It's been like 2 hours and a half, right? But maybe you want to talk about how you see the future of Python. What do you think is going to happen right now? Or for the community,
Boy.
or the core dev, or the language? whatever. What do you have in mind?
I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, so I've been around long enough that I've seen Python go through a lot of stuff, right? From being that language that no one knows about to having probably tens of millions of users, right? I've seen it go from Python 2 to Python 3. I've seen it grow into new areas multiple times, right? Whether that's web development, data science, this whole AI thing. Like there have been waves, education, right? There have been waves of new people joining the community from different places. And it makes predicting hard because it just continues to just happen, right? It's not like we went out targeting any of these communities. It's the fact that we did our best to be this open, welcoming place that happened to have this really nice programming language as a part of it that made people want to go, you know what, I want to go be part of that. I want to go be there, right? So honestly, for me, and I've said this other places before too, I just want the community to keep going. Like I want this to, I'm somewhat famous for having this phrase of I came for the language, but I stayed for the community. And so for me, I want the community to continue to be the thing that we are the most proud of, right? It's not the language, it's everything around it. It's the people. And I think a lot of people take that to heart. And I think regardless of any bumps we have in codes of conduct and whatever little things that happen, in general, I think that's still true. And I think has held and it will continue to hold because so many of us just flat out care about the people here, right? And that's what I want. That's what I see for the future is that we will just continue to have the language evolve at a pace that some people will find too fast, some will find too slow, and some will find just right. But that we will continue to keep this community around this language open and welcoming and just respectful and just a great place for people to come and get involved in programming in general and Python and specifically and just be this great place. After that, I don't know. I think it's interesting. We've hit this stride now where once again we've got companies investing in Python's performance for the first time and not only investing for years, really trying to see things through, like free threading is a good example of that. The JIT is a good example of that, right? Like suddenly people going like, yeah, you know what? We care enough about Python that we're going to pay people to just make it faster, right? Like that still blows my mind. Or companies are literally going to donate enough money to like, yeah, you know what? You just hire someone full time to just keep the project going, right? Which is great. I still think we could to please people who work at large companies who can sponsor the PSF or even small companies, please sponsor the PSF. More money is always appreciated. I've always said I really wish we could have 5 developers in residence. We currently are at 3. I really think 5 would be a really critical number to really keep the project healthy and running. Um, and after that, I don't know. I want us to continue to be such a wonderful place that people continue to try to plug the holes that we have in the ecosystem. Once again, whether that's wrestle with Beware or whatever to try to get the app distribution problem solved, right? Trying to solve the ease of installation problem, right? Like I think we're in a very unique place in the programming world where people care enough to want to put the time and effort into making this happen. And I hope people do on top of wanting to fund it. Because once again, there's only so much you can do in your spare time. And I've been lucky enough that I got involved when I took a gap year between my bachelor's and my master's degree, and then I happened to get involved while doing a master's and a PhD. So I happen to have a lot of spare time for a long time to really get stuff done. Um, but like I'm a dad now, so free time has gotten more scarce for me. I also happen to be lucky enough that my employer guarantees I will always have at least my Fridays to do what I feel is appropriate and totally supports me in doing that. But I'm just one person. And I hope we continue to be supportive of those people who want to come and help plug those holes to continue to make Python even better because once again, it's one of those the more problems we solve, the more people we can bring into this wonderful community to enrich it and make it better and let them also benefit from it as well, right? Like, I hope your experience, Kevin, has been like this is a fantastic community and people are lovely and warm and welcoming and just want to be helpful and just be wonderful, nice people, which for me, I don't only want to sustain that, I want to grow it. Like, I always want to get more people here, right? And I hope we continue to fill those gaps such that Python's holes in its feature set, whether it's in the language or in distribution or whatever, get plugged so that those people who had those problems that made them not able to use Python get plugged and filled so they can come in and join the community. Because you know what? I can now use Python for my problem. And now they get to come and get the benefits and also enrich it and be another welcoming, wonderful person that's part of this. And that's it. And so future, I don't know. I just hope we just keep doing that, keep doing what we're doing, and we keep just marching forward and just covering more and more of the software world with their needs so that we get to continue to be more and more of a wonderful place. Beyond that, my plans are WASI, packaging, keeping Python going, and whatever I can do to make Python easier to use to help grow this wonderful community of ours.
That's a great way to actually finish the interview. So let's do that. Thanks a lot, Brett, for coming here, but also for the work you've been doing for the 20 years. It literally changed the life of people. I know it certainly changed mine because the Python project actually brought me to work in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, in America. And yeah, I know a lot of people that actually got their life changed as well. And that works only if people like you do it. And we should, yeah, we were talking about gratitude here. And it would be fantastic if we would have more of it indeed. I do have a lot of it right now. And I'm not just saying that because we were talking about it before. I felt for that for years and years and years, even in high school, actually. So thanks a lot.
Yeah.
And
oh, you're quite welcome. I'm glad it's been a positive in your life, and I hope it continues to be for you and many others out there. And yeah, it's always nice to hear. So thanks a lot. I do appreciate that.
All right. Have a very good, well, for you, it's morning, right? So have a very good morning and
yeah.
the rest of the day.